For the first entry of Layer 2, we have the 1566 celestial phenomenon over Basel. This entry takes us over to a Reddit post that was actually made by Jimbo Seth. In case you're not aware, Jimbo Seth is actually the creator of the other mystery iceberg that we've been running through. Anyway, the post was created in the Non-Murder Mysteries subreddit in 2022. The post says, "Evening, I'm working on an unsolved mystery iceberg chart that you can find on my profile. One of the mysteries I came across was one of the only ones there isn't an actual plausible explanation for. The 1566 celestial phenomenon over Basel. Description of the event from its Wikipedia article: it happened in 1566 3 times, on 27 and 28 of July and on August 7th against the sunrise and sunset. We saw strange shapes in the sky above Basel. During the year 1566, on the 27th of July, after the sun had shone warm on the clear bright skies, and then around 9 p.m. it suddenly took a different shape and color. First, the sun lost all its radiance and luster, and it was no bigger than the full moon, and finally it seemed to weep tears of blood, and the air behind him went dark, and he was seen by all the people of the city and countryside. In much the same way also, the moon, which has already been almost full and has shone through the night, assuming an almost blood red color in the sky. The next day, Sunday, the sun rose at about 6 o'clock and slept with the same appearance it had when it was lying before. He lit the houses, streets, and around as if everything was blood red and fiery. At the dawn of August 7th, we saw large black spheres coming and going with great speed and precipitation before the sun and chattered as if they led a fight. Many of them were fiery red and soon crumbled and then extinguished. So this is obviously an outlandish story, however, several accounts of 3 events all the same. It sounds to me like this was an event that actually happened. An entire town reported 3 separate incidents, and in the 1500s, no less. If they saw something, they saw something. My friend and I have been discussing this for a bit, and we've come up with a few non-UFO related theories. I'd first like to talk about the only 2 theories I've seen online. Forest fire ashes and red skies aren't too uncommon in forest fire settings. Since smoke can travel for miles, it's possible the residents of Basel saw the smoke and ashes in the sky without seeing the fire itself. The accounts never specified whether or not the sun actually stayed red after the 3 incidents. They seem to be more focused on the black masses in the sky, which could have been ashes, as they were described to turn red and disintegrate. The moon was also red, implying this wasn't something that lasted for a short time. On top of that, only Basel reported this, meaning it was local. My friend brought up how they didn't report a scent of fire or a change in temperature, especially since they're portraying it as something paranormal. However, during that time period, do you think they might not have reported that because heat and fire weren't new things to them? If I knew the smell of smoke and the feeling of heat in the 1500s, but I didn't know what red skies and falling ashes looked like, I'd be more concerned with the latter. Meteor storm. The accounts say the events took place while the sun was rising, which could possibly explain the red hue it had. Is it possible a meteor storm was happening at that time? Then again, the writing specified that the things in the sky were black and red, not white, as a meteorite should be when it's falling to Earth. Theories my friend and I have come up with. Eye damage. People may have stared at the rising red sun for too long 3 times. Floaters. Is it possible someone in town pointed out the existence of floaters and everyone became hysterical? Volcanic eruption. This is the theory we've both seemed to settle on for now. Mystery eruptions are a lot more common in history than you'd think. We've yet to look at any volcanoes near Basel, but depending on the size of the volcano, distance might not even matter. For example, we all know Yellowstone could cover a great portion of the United States alone. Similarly to the forest fire theory, the black masses could have been volcanic ash. I'm not a volcano expert, but I'd assume volcanic ash is quite different from typical ashes. Another point is that fires aren't too rare even in those days. Volcanic eruptions, however, are less common. During eruptions, the smoke isn't too fanned out to cause a red sky until it has had time to disperse. This leads us to believe it was some sort of faraway volcanic eruption. The only issue we have is, why wasn't the town covered in ash? Is it possible that not all of the ash made it over, save for some larger embers? And what about the time frame between the second and third reports. One was on July 28th and the other on August 7th. Is it unheard of for active volcanoes to erupt in intervals, or is it possible that each day represented a different occurrence? The sun's appearance changes, then it rises the next day, and then the ashes come along a week later. Another theory is substances. They were high. Let's say some people found mushrooms in the woods and decided to eat them together while staring at the sky a few times. Perhaps they were celebrating considering it was a Sunday, or maybe something in the air, such as volcanic fumes, got them high, and then they saw the black balls. If you can't tell, we're losing our minds trying to make sense of this. So far, this is all we have. I'm still on board with the volcano theory, but I'm definitely stumped on the two issues related to that theory, and we'd love to hear any thoughts everyone else has. One user named BlackSheep249 said the following in their comment: "As someone whose family is from Basel, I find this fascinating. Great write-up. From my knowledge, the closest major volcano is likely Mount Etna in Italy, which is a significant volcano and not too far from the rest of Europe. A quick Google search indicates there may have been a Mount Etna eruption in 1566. However, it was not necessarily in July or August. Source linked below as I'm on mobile. This also wouldn't account for the localization, given that there is a large portion of Italy and the whole of Switzerland between Basel and Mount Etna, unless other towns were more affected by ash and therefore didn't think much of the red sun. The paper I've linked below seems to discuss primary sources for the 1566 eruption, but doesn't mention the Basel source, so I'm unsure if they discounted it or just didn't include it. This has led me down a rabbit hole far too late at night, so this is as far as I got, but I hope it's somewhat helpful." Another user named New Work Account said this in a comment: "There's a spate of these sorts of reports in the mid to late 1500s in Europe, typically referred to as phenomena at X. Nuremberg is another location with a report of unusual aerial phenomena around this time, but I know of at least 4, including Basel. The problem with all the conventional explanations is that we would expect them to be more than local. Firestorms, volcanoes, and the breakup of an aerial object in the atmosphere. All of these would be visible over a wide area if they were putting on the sort of show reported here. I personally dismiss mass hysteria out of hand. It's a made-up explanation with no putative mechanism. There's no evidence whatsoever for mass contagious multisensory hallucinations except for the very incidents that mass hysteria was created to explain. The notion that these folks suddenly mistook floaters in their eyes for an extended aerial light show, or gave themselves eye damage by staring at the sun, but the eye damage apparently only had symptoms on 3 isolated occasions, is simply ludicrous. They were pre-industrial, not idiots. I'm not belittling the OP here, I'm just pointing out that these hypotheses strain credulity. What were they actually? Who knows? Assuming the tempting aliens hypothesis isn't true, my guess would be an otherwise undocumented cultural phenomenon, something that wasn't strictly or literally true and which the recorder may have known to be untrue but recorded anyway for other reasons. For example, there was a spate of US newspapers in the 1900s making up completely false sensational stories to drum up circulation. They often chose tales of the fantastic, which I assume was done in part because it was unlikely to cause any actual trouble. Communities react differently to reports of horse thieves versus airships in the sky. Similarly, there is a pretty long history of believers of various sorts making up stories to achieve what they viewed as a worthy religious goal. For example, to describe a person's supposed near-death visit to hell, regardless of the veracity of the tale, because whether it's true or not, it could cause people to repent. The problem, of course, is that if this interpretation is true, we don't know what these aerial displays would have symbolized to contemporary observers. If they were signs in the sky, the question would be signs to whom? The primary objection to this idea, besides the fact that there is absolutely no evidence for it, is that the recorders of these happenings seem about as baffled as we are. We might expect a story with a point to have a handy clarification as to how the reader should interpret it, e.g., God is angry, fix your behavior. Koreshanity, or the Koreshan Unity, was a religious and communal society founded by Cyrus Teed in the late 19th century. Teed, who later adopted the name Koresh, developed a belief system that combined elements of Christianity, mysticism, and science. The most intriguing and mysterious aspect of koreshanity is its hollow earth theory, which posits that the earth and the entire universe exist within a concave sphere. Cyrus Reed Teed was born on October 18, 1839 in Trout Creek, Delaware County, New York. He was the son of Jesse and Sarah Teed, a family with deep roots in the region. From a young age, Teed exhibited an inquisitive nature and a keen interest in both religion and science. These interests would later become the foundation of the Koreshanity. Teed began his professional journey by studying medicine. He enrolled at the Eclectic Medical College of the City of New York, where he was exposed to a variety of medical practices, including those that emphasized holistic and alternative approaches. This eclectic training influenced his later beliefs and practices. After earning his medical degree, Teed returned to his hometown and set up a medical practice. However, his career as a physician was short-lived as he increasingly devoted his time to spiritual and alchemical pursuits. The turning point in Teed's life came in 1869. While conducting an alchemical experiment in his laboratory, Teed experienced what he described as a divine revelation. He claimed that a beautiful woman whom he identified as the Divine Mother appeared to him and revealed the secrets of the universe. This vision was profoundly transformative for Teed. He interpreted it as a call to a higher purpose and believed that he had been chosen to reveal divine truths to humanity. This experience led him to adopt the name Koresh, the Hebrew form of Cyrus, symbolizing his new divine mission. Following his revelation, Teed began to preach his new doctrines, which combined elements of Christianity, alchemy, and his unique cosmological theories. He attracted a small group of followers who were intrigued by his charismatic personality and unconventional ideas. In the early 1870s, Teed and his followers established the first Koreshan commune in Moravia, New York. This initial community was short-lived, but it laid the groundwork for the larger and more organized community that would later be established in Estero, Florida. Again, the most distinct and controversial aspect of Koreshan belief was cellular cosmogony. It details that the Earth is concave rather than convex. Teed claimed that humans live on the inside surface of this hollow Earth. He adds that the sun, moon, and stars are not separate celestial bodies in space, but reflections of various elements within this hollow sphere. The sun is described as an invisible electromagnetic battery at the center, while the stars are reflections on 7 mercurial disks floating in the sphere's center. Teed conducted experiments to prove his theory, most notably the rectilineator experiment in 1898 on Naples Beach, Florida. This experiment aimed to show that the horizon curved upwards, consistent with a concave Earth. Cyrus Teed believed he was the 7th messianic figure, a prophet chosen to lead humanity into a new spiritual era. This belief was central to the Koreshanity's theology. He taught that through spiritual purity, celibacy, and adherence to Koreshan principles, followers could achieve physical immortality. This belief was tied to the practice of celibacy, which was seen as a way to conserve vital life energy and achieve a higher spiritual state. Additionally, Koreshans believed in reincarnation, viewing it as a continuation of the soul's journey toward perfection. Teed suggested that faithful followers would be reincarnated to fulfill specific roles in the divine plan. The social structure and daily practices of the Koreshanity were designed to reflect and reinforce their spiritual beliefs. Central to this was the practice of communal living and celibacy. All property and resources were shared among the community members. This collectivist approach aimed to eliminate materialism and promote equality and cooperation. The community engaged in various enterprises, including agriculture, printing, and manufacturing, to ensure self-sufficiency. They established a World College of Life, a print shop, and other communal facilities. Celibacy was considered essential for spiritual purification and attaining immortality. It was believed that sexual abstinence allowed individuals to conserve and redirect their vital energies towards spiritual and communal goals. The community promoted gender equality, and many women held significant roles within the organization. The Seven Sisters, a council of female leaders, managed the daily affairs of the community and lived in the planetary court. The decline of Koreshanity involved both internal dynamics and external pressures. The death of its founder, Cyrus Teed, in 1908 marked a significant turning point, but the movement's decline had deeper roots in its social practices, economic challenges, and changing societal context. One of the most significant internal challenges faced by the Koreshan unity was its strict practice of celibacy. While celibacy was believed to be essential for spiritual purification and achieving immortality, it had practical consequences for the community's sustainability. Without new births, the community's growth depended entirely on recruiting new members from outside. As the novelty of the Koreshan beliefs wore off and skepticism grew, attracting new adherents became increasingly difficult. This led to an aging population, and the lack of new members meant that the number of active participants gradually dwindled. This demographic issue was exacerbated by the departure of disillusioned members who left the community in search of more conventional lifestyles. After Teed's death, his body was placed in a tin bath and displayed in the hope of his resurrection. This act underscored the deep spiritual conviction of his followers, but also highlighted the community's vulnerability without its leader. Local authorities eventually ordered the burial of Teed's body when no resurrection occurred. The community struggled to find a leader who could match Teed's charisma and authority. The lack of strong leadership led to internal conflicts and further weakened the organizational structure of the Koreshan unity. The Koreshan unity's economic model relied heavily on communal labor and shared resources. While this model worked well initially, it faced several challenges over time. The community's self-sufficient economy included agriculture, manufacturing, and publishing. However, economic pressures from the broader market economy and the community's isolation in Estero made it difficult to sustain these enterprises. The Great Depression of the 1930s further strained their resources, leading to financial difficulties. The Koreshans' unconventional beliefs and practices often put them at odds with local residents in Florida, particularly in Fort Myers. This tension culminated in a violent altercation in 1906, during which Teed was injured. The Koreshans also faced legal and political challenges. Their attempts to gain political influence, such as forming the Progressive Liberal Party in 1906, were largely unsuccessful and further alienated them from the local population. These failures diminished their influence and ability to protect their communal interests. The Crofton Tunnels, located in Wiltshire, England, are part of the Kennet and Avon Canal system. Constructed in the early 19th century, these tunnels have been the subject of numerous legends and unexplained phenomena, particularly focusing on events from 1973. The Kennet and Avon Canal was a monumental engineering project designed to create a navigable waterway connecting the River Thames at Reading with the River Avon at Bristol. This canal aimed to facilitate the transportation of goods, significantly impacting the economic landscape of the region. The canal stretches approximately 87 miles, and its construction faced numerous challenges, particularly in traversing the natural landscape of Wiltshire. The initial design proposed a 2.5-mile tunnel between the villages of Crofton and Burbage. However, tunneling was an expensive and technically challenging process during the early 19th century. To mitigate costs, a revised plan was implemented, raising the summit level of the canal and constructing a shorter tunnel. This change not only reduced the tunneling distance, but also necessitated the development of a pumping station to elevate water to the new summit level. In 1973, a group of local historians and spelunkers embarked on an exploratory mission into the Crofton tunnels. Their goal was to investigate long-standing reports of unusual occurrences within the tunnels. The subsequent events they experienced have since become central to the mystery of the Crofton tunnels. The group comprised of 7 individuals, including local historians, spelunkers, and amateur paranormal investigators. Led by a local history enthusiast named John Harris, the team also included a geologist, 2 spelunkers with experience in exploring subterranean environments, and 3 individuals with a keen interest in the paranormal. The primary objective of the expedition was to document any physical or paranormal anomalies within the Crofton tunnels. They aimed to map out the tunnel system accurately, identify any geological formations or structural peculiarities, and record any unexplained phenomena such as strange lights, sounds, or temperature variations. The team was well equipped with flashlights, cameras, temperature sensors, and audio recording devices to capture any evidence of unusual activity. The explorers reported seeing bright, inexplicable invisible lights deep within the tunnels. These lights appeared to move independently, without any apparent source. According to John Harris, the lights ranged in color from white to a faint bluish hue and seemed to flicker in and out of existence. Despite their attempts to approach the lights, they always seemed to remain just out of reach. Several members of the group claimed to hear faint echoing voices. These voices were described as indistinct and seemed to come from all directions, making it impossible to pinpoint their source. Some members reported hearing conversations, while others described hearing single words or phrases. Efforts to capture the voices on audio recordings yielded mixed results, with some faint sounds being captured but remaining largely unintelligible. The explorers documented abrupt and significant drops in temperature at various points within the tunnels. These changes were far beyond what would be expected in the relatively stable underground environment. Temperature sensors recorded drops of up to 10 degrees Celsius in a matter of seconds, particularly in areas where the unexplained lights and voices were most frequently observed. The team noted that these temperature drops were often accompanied by a palpable sense of unease and a feeling of being watched. Some participants experienced severe disorientation and vertigo, leading them to lose their bearings despite having detailed maps and plans of the tunnels. These symptoms were most commonly reported in the deeper sections of the tunnel system, where the unexplained phenomena were most prevalent. The affected individuals described a sensation of the tunnel walls closing in on them and a strong urge to leave the area. In some cases, they had to be guided out by other team members due to their inability to navigate the tunnels on their own. According to John Harris, the first signs of unusual activity began shortly after the team entered the deeper sections of the tunnels. He described seeing a bright light ahead of them, which appeared to hover in mid-air before vanishing. This was followed by the sudden temperature drop, which left the team shivering despite their warm clothing. Harris also reported hearing a faint whispering sound, which seemed to grow louder as they ventured further into the tunnels. The geologist in the team, Dr. Emma Wells, conducted a thorough examination of the tunnel walls and surrounding rock formations. She noted several unusual features, including areas of highly mineralized rock that could potentially interact with electromagnetic fields. Dr. Wells also identified several natural gas pockets within the tunnel walls, which she hypothesized could be responsible for some of the reported phenomena. However, she found no definitive evidence to explain the lights or voices, leaving her puzzled by the team's experiences. One of the most popular supernatural theories is that the Crofton tunnels are haunted by the spirits of workers who died during the construction of the canal and tunnels. This theory is supported by numerous reports of disembodied voices, cold spots, and feelings of unease within the tunnels. Paranormal investigators like Sarah Thompson, who participated in the 1973 expedition, believe that these phenomena are indicative of restless spirits attempting to communicate or manifest their presence. According to local folklore, the spirits of these workers are said to haunt the tunnels, making their presence known through various paranormal activities. Electronic voice phenomena sessions conducted during the 1973 exploration reportedly captured faint, indistinct voices, further fueling the belief in ghostly inhabitants. Natural explanations for the Crofton tunnels phenomena focus on geological and environmental factors that could create the reported effects. One such explanation involves the presence of natural gas pockets within the tunnel walls. Dr. Emma Wells, the geologist from the 1973 expedition, identified areas of mineralized rock and potential gas pockets that could contribute to unusual occurrences. Natural gas leaks, particularly methane, can cause hallucinations and physical symptoms such as dizziness and nausea. Methane is lighter than air and can accumulate in confined spaces like tunnels. If explorers unknowingly disturb these gas pockets, the resulting exposure could explain the visual and auditory hallucinations, as well as the disorientation and vertigo experienced by the team. Furthermore, methane can react with other chemicals or minerals in the environment, potentially creating light emissions or will-o-wisp effects that could account for the unexplained lights seen in the tunnels. The disembodied voices reported by the explorers could be attributed to echoes and sound distortions within the tunnels. The shape and material of the tunnel walls can cause sounds to travel in unexpected ways, making distant noises appear closer or creating auditory illusions. These effects are particularly pronounced in enclosed, curved spaces like tunnels, where sound waves can bounce off the walls and create overlapping echoes. Furthermore, when individuals enter a setting with the anticipation of encountering paranormal activity, their minds can amplify ordinary stimuli into extraordinary experiences. The expectancy effect is a well-documented psychological phenomenon where people's expectations influence their perceptions and experiences. If the explorers entered the tunnels with the belief that they might encounter ghosts or other supernatural events, their minds could interpret ordinary sounds, lights, or temperature changes as paranormal. This effect is particularly strong in group settings where individual experiences can reinforce each other, creating a collective belief in the presence of supernatural phenomena. The emdrive, short for electromagnetic drive, is a controversial and highly debated concept in the field of propulsion systems. Proposed by British engineer Roger Scheuer in 2001, the emdrive claims to produce thrust without the need for traditional propellant, thus challenging the fundamental principles of physics, particularly the conservation of momentum and Newton's third law of motion. The emdrive operates on the principle of generating microwaves within a resonant cavity, typically conical or truncated cone-shaped. The microwaves are theorized to exert force within the cavity, creating a differential pressure that results in a net thrust. This concept, if proven valid, would revolutionize space travel by providing a propulsion system that does not require propellant, making long-duration missions more feasible and cost-effective. The idea behind the emdrive is that by bouncing microwaves within a closed cavity, the shape of the cavity will result in an imbalance of forces, leading to thrust. The narrower end of the cavity should experience a greater force than the wider end, propelling the device forward without expelling any mass. The concept of a propellantless drive contradicts the law of conservation of momentum, which states that the momentum of a closed system remains constant unless acted upon by an external force. This has led many in the scientific community to be skeptical of the emdrive's claims, as it appears to violate fundamental physical laws. Roger Scheuer conducted the initial experiments in the early 2000s. Scheuer's tests reportedly demonstrated small amounts of thrust, which he attributed to the unique design of the emdrive. He claimed that the device generated thrust by bouncing microwaves within a specially shaped cavity, creating an imbalance of forces. However, the results were not widely accepted in the scientific community. Critics pointed out several potential flaws in his experimental setup, including insufficient isolation from environmental factors and the lack of peer-reviewed publication. This skepticism set the stage for subsequent investigations by other researchers aiming to independently verify or refute Scheuer's claims. One of the most significant investigations into the emdrive was conducted by NASA's EagleWorks laboratory, led by Dr. Harold "Sonny" White. The team at EagleWorks tested the emdrive and published their findings in a 2016 paper. They reported measuring a small but measurable thrust of 1.2 millinewtons per kilowatt of input power. This result suggested that the emdrive might indeed produce thrust without the need for propellant. The experimental setup at EagleWorks involved a vacuum chamber to eliminate air currents and other environmental factors. Despite the careful design, the reported thrust was very small, leading to debates about whether the observed effect was genuinely due to the emdrive or if it resulted from experimental errors such as thermal expansion or electromagnetic interference. Researchers at the Dresden University of Technology in Germany conducted a series of tests that were critical of the emdrive's claims. Led by Professor Martin Tajmar, the team aimed to rigorously test the emdrive while accounting for potential sources of error. Their experiments used a highly sensitive torsion balance to measure thrust. In their 2018 study, Tajmar's team reported that the measured thrust could be explained by thermal effects rather than a novel propulsion mechanism. They found that when power was supplied to the emdrive, it caused thermal expansion of the device's components, leading to a shift in the center of mass and the appearance of thrust. By modifying the experimental setup to minimize thermal effects, they observed that the apparent thrust disappeared. A team at Northwestern Polytechnical University in Xi'an, China, also conducted experiments on the emdrive. In 2012, the Chinese researchers reported detecting a thrust of up to 720 millinewtons at 2.5 kilowatts of input power. This result was significantly higher than those reported by other researchers and generated considerable interest. However, follow-up experiments by the same team yielded different results. In a 2016 study, the researchers revised their experimental setup to use a more sensitive torsion pendulum and better control for external influences. They concluded that the previously observed thrust was likely due to experimental errors, such as electromagnetic interference from external power sources. In addition to individual experiments, several comprehensive reviews and meta-analyses have been conducted to evaluate the body of research on the emdrive. These reviews aim to synthesize the findings of multiple studies and provide a broader perspective on the validity of the emdrive. A notable meta-analysis by Jose Rodal, Jeremiah Mulliken, and Noel Munson, published on NASASpaceflight.com, analyzed the results of various experiments conducted by different research groups. Their analysis highlighted the inconsistencies in the reported thrust measurements and emphasized the need for more rigorous experimental controls and independent replications. They concluded that while some experiments suggested the possibility of thrust, the evidence was not conclusive enough to overturn established physical principles. Research on the emdrive continues, with new experiments and studies being conducted to resolve the ongoing debate. Some researchers are exploring alternative theories that could explain the observed thrust without violating known physical laws. For instance, one hypothesis suggests that the emdrive might interact with virtual particles in the quantum vacuum, generating thrust through a novel mechanism that does not require expelling propellant. While this idea remains speculative, it highlights the potential for the emdrive to stimulate new lines of inquiry in theoretical physics. The case of Nicholas Barclay and Frederic Bourdin is both strange and tragic, spanning across continents, involving several identities, and diving into disturbing details on family dynamics, including deception. Nicholas Barclay was born on December 31st, 1980 in San Antonio, Texas. He lived with his mother, Beverly Dollarhide, and his older half-brother, Jason. The family had a troubled history marked by dysfunction and substance abuse. Nicholas himself had a juvenile criminal record, which included petty crimes such as stealing as well as breaking and entering. Despite these issues, Nicholas was described as a lively boy. On June 13, 1994, in San Antonio, Texas, 13-year-old Nicholas Barclay disappeared without a trace. The boy spent that day playing basketball with friends at a local park. As the afternoon went on, Nicholas decided it was time to head home. He made his way to a nearby convenience store and used the payphone to call his house, hoping to get a ride. Nicholas's half-brother Jason answered the phone. According to later accounts, Jason told Nicholas that their mother, Beverly, was asleep and that he should walk home. This seemingly mundane conversation would be the last confirmed contact anyone had with Nicholas Barclay. The distance from the convenience store to the Barclay home was approximately 1.5 miles. Under normal circumstances, it should have taken Nicholas no more than 30 to 40 minutes to walk home. However, he never arrived. Surprisingly, Nicholas's disappearance did not immediately raise alarms within his family. This delayed response highlights the turmoil going on back home. It was later revealed that Nicholas regularly ran away from home for short periods. There were frequent domestic disturbances, which are often cited as a reason for why Nicholas did leave home. Furthermore, it was known that both Nicholas's mother and his brother Jason struggled with substance issues. It wasn't until June 16th, 3 days after Nicholas was last seen, that Beverly finally reported her son missing to the San Antonio Police Department. Once the missing person report was filed, local law enforcement initiated a search for Nicholas. However, the investigation faced several challenges from the start. The 3-day delay in reporting meant that crucial early evidence might have been lost, and the fact that Nicholas had a history of running away and then returning home later made investigators believe that this situation would resolve itself with time. There was also a significant lack of immediate media coverage, which limited public awareness and potential leads. Despite these obstacles, police conducted interviews with Nicholas's friends, family, and acquaintances. They also searched the areas where Nicholas was last seen and the routes he might have taken home. As the investigation progressed, a clearer picture of Nicholas's life emerged, revealing potential clues and complicating factors. As I've already stated, Nicholas has a juvenile criminal record. This raised questions about whether he might have had an altercation with an adult connected to criminal activities. Some even suspected that it was Nicholas's own family that had a hand in his disappearance due to their frequent conflicts with each other. After interviewing Nicholas's teachers, investigators learned that he frequently threatened them and he actually had 3 tattoos despite his young age. I got varied answers as to what the tattoos depicted, but it said he had the tattoos on his right hand, left shoulder, and left ankle. An interesting development occurred in September 1994, about 3 months after Nicholas's disappearance. Jason, Nicholas's half-brother, called the police, claiming he had seen Nicholas attempting to break into the family's garage. According to Jason's account, when he confronted the figure, they fled the scene. This report led to renewed interest and a subsequent search of the area, but no evidence was found to corroborate Jason's claim. The incident raised several questions, particularly in regard to Jason. Some questioned the genuineness of Jason's claim, suspecting that this may have been an attempt to misdirect the investigation. If the claim was real, then who was it that was trying to break in? Could it really have been Nicholas? As weeks turned into months with no sign of Nicholas, various theories began to circulate. The primary ones were the runaway theory and foul play. There were also talks about family involvement or possibly an accident. Another theory that was not spoken about as much was the concept that Nicholas may have been abducted for trafficking purposes. In October 1997, more than 3 years after Nicholas vanished, a phone call from Spain would reignite the case in the most unexpected way. A young man claiming to be Nicholas Barclay had been found in a youth shelter in Linares, Spain. This development would lead to one of the most bizarre chapters in the case, involving an elaborate deception that would capture international attention and raise disturbing questions. The man claiming to be Nicholas was actually named Frederic Bourdin. Unbeknownst to everyone, Frederic was an experienced French con artist with a long history of impersonation. Born on June 13, 1974 in Nanterre, France, Frederic Bourdin had a troubled childhood. He was raised by his grandparents in Nantes and never knew his father, who his mother claimed was a married Algerian immigrant. Bourdin began his career of impersonation at a young age, driven by what he later described as a search for love and affection, and attention he never received as a child. Bourdin earned the nickname the Chameleon from Interpol due to his remarkable ability to assume false identities. He claimed to have taken on at least 500 false identities throughout his life, including those of 3 missing teenagers. Bourdin's plan began when he contacted an American hotline for missing children. Posing as the director of a Spanish children's shelter, he provided a description that matched his own appearance. The well-meaning operator, believing they might have found a missing child, provided Bourdin with Nicholas Barclay's name. Despite significant differences in appearance, Bourdin set about transforming himself into the missing boy. He dyed his hair to match Nicholas's light brown color, wore blue contact lenses, adopted a Texan accent, and got fake tattoos to match what Nicholas had. However, there were some differences that he could not change. To explain them, Bourdin came up with an elaborate backstory. He claimed that Nicholas had been kidnapped and transported to Europe, where he was held as a sex slave in an illegal business ring. This traumatic experience, he said, had altered his eye color and given him a European accent. Nicholas's older sister, Carrie Gibson, flew to Spain to identify the person claiming to be her brother. Despite the obvious differences, Gibson identified Bourdin as Nicholas. This identification allowed Bourdin to be flown to the United States and to begin living with the Barclay family. For nearly 5 months, from October 1997 to March 1998, Bourdin lived with the Barclay family in San Antonio, Texas, posing as the long-lost Nicholas. The family's acceptance of Bourdin, despite the glaring inconsistencies in his appearance and behavior, has been a subject of much speculation and analysis. Some have suggested that the family's desperation to believe that Nicholas was alive might have blinded them to the truth. Others, including Bourdin himself, have proposed more sinister theories. While the family appeared to accept Bourdin, not everyone was convinced. A local private investigator named Charlie Parker became suspicious while working with a TV crew filming the family. Parker compared photos of Bourdin's ears to those of Nicholas and found they did not match. As suspicions grew, Bourdin's carefully constructed facade began to fall apart. In February 1998, the FBI obtained a court order to take fingerprints and DNA samples from the person claiming to be Nicholas. These were later identified as belonging to Bourdin. Faced with mounting evidence, Bourdin eventually confessed to his true identity. In September 1998, he pleaded guilty to passport fraud and perjury in a San Antonio federal court. Bourdin was sentenced to 6 years in prison, more than twice the recommended sentence evidence under the guidelines. The revelation of Bourdin's deception left many questions unanswered and gave rise to several disturbing theories. The true fate of Nicholas Barclay remains unknown to this day. The case is still considered open, with no definitive evidence of what happened to the 13-year-old boy who vanished in 1994. Suddenly, Bourdin accused the Barclay family of involvement in Nicholas's disappearance. He suggested that the family's willingness to accept him, despite the obvious differences, indicated they might be covering up a crime. Adding to the mystery, Nicholas's older half-brother Jason died of a substance overdose shortly after Bourdin's true identity was revealed. Some, including Bourdin, have speculated that this might have been related to guilt or fear of exposure. Private investigator Charlie Parker has continued to pursue the case, believing that the Barclay family may not be blameless in Nicholas's disappearance. However, without a body or any concrete evidence, these remain speculations. This next entry, titled Werebear Family 1883, took me to an obscure newspaper article from September of 1883, and I tried to do some more digging on this topic, and it led me to some strange topics that just didn't seem to be related to the entry in any concise way. So for this part, I'm just going to read the article to you word for word, and you can decipher the story however you want. Vandal and Edward P. Strong, for some time past, have been traveling through portions of Florida, Alabama, and Mississippi inspecting pine lands. These gentlemen are the emissaries of a grand syndicate, or at least so they claim, which has been formed in Minnesota for the purpose of buying immense tracts of land in the South and forming a complete system of sawmills from which to furnish lumber for the world, but more especially for shipment into Mexico, where they claim they will always find a ready market at good prices. These gentlemen are all men of means and very kindly in their deportment, making friends in every portion of the country they have visited and bring with them undoubted credentials as to their honor and integrity. Therefore, some credit must be given to the following relation, which each of them declares to be nothing but facts. It might be as well to state here that nearly on the line between St. Tammany and Washington parishes resides a man about 50 years of age who answers to the name of Crazy Alec. This dilapidated specimen of crazy humanity resides in the most lonesome portion of the parish that it would be possible to find, seldom making his appearance among the settlers and then only when forced to do so from hunger. He is harmlessly insane, and sometimes when he visits a place to secure a snack of something to eat, will become quite communicative and tell some wonderful stories concerning his forest home. But where he resides, no one knows or cares, and his eccentric stories were never heeded, being regarded as the fancies of a madman's brain. But on several occasions, Crazy Alec has told a story concerning a woman and some bears, which sounded ridiculous and improbable in the extreme, but which, nevertheless, has proved to be true. This is a narrative related by the three gentlemen first named. While in the lower portion of Mississippi, we heard that some very desirable land lay in Washington and St. Tammany parishes, Louisiana, and that it could be procured very reasonably, so our party started for that section. Upon arriving at the desired point, we obtained accommodations at a farmhouse and the next day started on horseback on a tour of inspection. We had covered considerable ground during the day and started on the return at about 4 p.m. Mr. Vandal, who had become weary of riding, asked one of us to lead his animal while he walked on, as we stopped now and then to make observations and take notes, as was our custom on such journeys. Vandal got some distance ahead of the two of us who had the horses, and suddenly we saw him come around a bend in the road a short distance ahead of us on a dead run. We spurred our horses to meet him, and when he came up almost out of breath, he said, "Tie your horses to a tree and come up the road. There's the greatest sight you ever saw." We did as he requested and followed him up the road some 300 yards. Putting his fingers to his lips to indicate that we must be silent and cautious, he started to creep through an undergrowth on the side of the road, and we followed. At this juncture, we were startled to hear a deep, coarse laugh issue from a space apparently a short distance ahead of us. It was evidently a human laugh, but it was so hollow and unearthly that it sent a chill of terror through us all. This laugh was followed by another and then another of the same kind, and these were succeeded by a long, hearty laugh, apparently that of a female. Partly recovered from our astonishment at a motion from Vandal, we crept on about 30 yards to the edge of the thicket. There, in an open space a few yards beyond, we beheld the most astonishing sight that ever greeted mortal eye. Seated on the trunk of a fallen tree was a dilapidated-looking specimen of feminine humanity whose small bit of clothing was naught but rags and whose hair hung about her shoulders in a tangled mess. She was apparently about 60 years of age, was of medium stature, and dark, as though from long exposure to the sun and weather. Nearby were 3 of the most hideous objects one could imagine, evidently playing, and she seemed to be watching them attentively. To describe these 3 objects, which you could not call human, is very difficult. Their heads were shaped like human beings, the tops, ears, eyes, and neck being perfect, but the mouth and nose coming together broad and thick, more on the order of a bear. The arms resembled perfectly those of men, but from the waist down, they bore the shape and semblance of a bear, being covered entirely with long, coarse black hair. The feet were also similar to those of a bear, being flat and seemingly armed with immense claws. For some time, we watched them with mute astonishment as they wrestled and played, now dancing erect as a biped and then on all fours as a quadruped, and now and then giving vent to their horrible laugh. How long this would have continued we do not know, but just then Strong let his excitement get the better of his discretion and changed his position, partly exposing himself to view and at the same time making a slight noise. The noise attracted the woman's attention and she evidently saw Strong, for uttering a cry of alarm, she started through the undergrowth on the other side of the opening with the speed of a deer, closely followed by the 3 strange-looking creatures running on all fours. As soon as we had recovered from our astonishment, we attempted to follow them, but they were too swift of foot, and fearing we would become lost, we were forced to return. The next day, in the company of several other gentlemen, we scoured the section thoroughly, but could find no traces of the strange family. "I have traveled far," said Mr. Vandal, "and seen many wonderful things, but this human bear family, as I call them, surpasses my experience heretofore by far." Doveland, Wisconsin is a legend that has caught the imagination of many. The story revolves around a small town that allegedly vanished without a trace in the late 1980s or early 1990s. Despite numerous personal anecdotes and supposed memorabilia, there is no concrete evidence to support the existence of Doveland. The legend of Doveland appears to have originated from internet discussions and social media posts. The town is often described as being located in the heart of Wisconsin, but no specific location is ever given. According to the legend, Doveland was a small community that somehow disappeared, leaving behind no official records or maps to confirm its existence. Believers in the Doveland legend often cite 3 main pieces of evidence: photographs, memorabilia, and Google artifacts. A single photograph allegedly taken in the 1980s or 1990s is often mentioned. The photo depicts 3 people in a restaurant booth, but there is nothing in the picture that confirms it was taken in Doveland. The photograph is sometimes described as unsettling, with faded colors and a barely visible figure, but to others it looks like any other photo. Some people claim to have souvenirs, such as coffee mugs and shirts bearing the Doveland name. However, these items are typically custom-made and post-date the first mentions of the Doveland myth. There is no verifiable evidence that these items existed before the legend began circulating online. A search for Doveland, Wisconsin often brings up articles about missing people in Wisconsin. This is likely due to the Google algorithm linking the keywords missing and Wisconsin rather than any actual connection to Doveland. This so-called ghost trace is not considered credible evidence of the town's existence. Several theories have been proposed to explain the disappearance of Doveland, but none have been proven. These theories range from natural disasters to supernatural events and government conspiracies. Some suggest that it was swallowed by a sinkhole or destroyed by an earthquake. However, Wisconsin does not have significant fault lines and no historical records support the occurrence of such a catastrophic event in the area. Another theory is that Doveland was destroyed by damming, similar to other towns in Wisconsin that were flooded due to dam failures. While this has happened in the state's history, there are always records and remnants of the towns that were affected. No such evidence exists for Doveland. A more fantastical theory posits that Doveland was a military town that ceased to exist after a secret operation or experiment went horribly wrong. This theory is highly speculative and lacks any credible evidence. Military experiments that result in the complete erasure of a town would likely leave behind some form of documentation or physical evidence. Others believe that Doveland's residents simply moved away due to economic hardship, leading to the town becoming a ghost town. However, ghost towns typically leave behind structures and other remnants, none of which have been found in the area. Another common theory involves supernatural elements such as a vengeful spirit causing the town to disappear or the town being hidden from view by some unknown force. Some even claim that on certain nights, ghostly outlines of buildings and homes can be seen in the mist, and the ghostly residents can be heard walking the deserted streets. These stories are highly anecdotal and lack any verifiable evidence. In August 1997, an intriguing yet disturbing phone call to The Howard Stern Show sparked a mystery that continues to garner attention to this day. A caller identifying himself as Clay claimed to be a serial killer responsible for the murders of 12 sex workers in the New Orleans area. This 17-minute conversation, which initially seemed like a prank call, gradually took on a more sinister tone as the caller calmly and methodically described his alleged crimes. Now, I did some testing with the call, but every single time I either had issues with age restriction or copyright. For that reason, I will not be playing the call here, but it is easily accessible on YouTube if you want to give it a listen. The call began when Howard Stern was informed by his call screener that a listener named Ed was on the line claiming to have killed prostitutes. When Stern took the call, the man immediately corrected him, stating, "You can call me Clay." This assertive correction was the first red flag that suggested this might not be a typical prank call. As the conversation unfolded, Clay provided disturbing details about his alleged crimes. This included his victim count of 12, his motive being a sense of power, his primary weapon being a hammer, and his initial killing taking place when he was 16 in a parking garage. Clay added that on one occasion, he killed 2 people in a single night, one in New Orleans and another in Mississippi. The victims were both black and white, primarily female. As for disposal, Clay claimed that he just dumped the remains on the side of the road, but before abandoning them completely, he would shove money in one of the orifices of the victim. When asked if he had any past trauma or mental issues, Clay denied any history of abuse or trauma. He did share that he tried LSD in the past, but didn't use any substances after that single instance. Throughout the call, Clay maintained an eerily calm and matter-of-fact demeanor, answering questions without hesitation or emotion. This composure made the conversation unsettling and led many listeners to believe the call might be genuine. Initially, the call was met with skepticism, as outlandish claims were not uncommon on their show. But as the conversation progressed, they began to take the caller more seriously, carefully probing for details that could potentially aid law enforcement. The day after the broadcast, the FBI reportedly contacted the radio show requesting a copy of the conversation. This suggested that authorities were taking the call seriously and investigating its authenticity. Despite the intense interest generated by the call, the true identity of Clay was never confirmed, and it remains unclear whether the call was genuine or an elaborate hoax. This uncertainty has fueled ongoing speculation and debate. No definitive proof has emerged to either confirm or debunk Clay's claims. Furthermore, the call coincided with a series of unsolved murders of sex workers in the New Orleans area, lending credibility to Clay's story, and the caller provided specific information about his alleged crimes, which some argue would be difficult for a hoaxer to fabricate convincingly. Over the years, various theories have emerged about the identity of Clay and the authenticity of his claims. Some have speculated that the caller might have been Russell Elwood, a suspected serial killer linked to murders in New Orleans. Elwood was arrested in March 1998 and later died in prison in 2014. However, this connection was never proven. Another theory suggests that Clay was Victor Grant. The caller mentioned that a black police officer had been suspected of some of the crimes at one point. This detail aligns with the case of Victor Gant, a New Orleans police officer who became a suspect in the deaths of Sharon Robinson and Karen Ivester in 1995. However, Gant's involvement in these cases was never conclusively established, and he does not match the description Clay gave of himself.